come from a privileged background already, which has direct ties to colonialism, you are more likely to be able to make it to these institutions. And if, on the other hand, if you're not from these backgrounds and if you don't come from these places of privilege, you're going to have a harder time in being able to get into that bubble of.
It's going to get to a point where, unfortunately, a lot of people like us will not be able to attend these universities, whether it's siblings and things of that nature. And it's not because we're not smart enough, it's simply because of resources. Because the truth is, some of us don't have the opportunity, the luck, the opportunities, or the resources to get this far.
The American lawmaking system right now is trying really hard to make sure that people of color aren't given the same opportunities as the larger portion of the population, and I don't think that's very fair to us.
America is known for education and the great opportunities it brings. Yet beneath its surface lies a system deeply rooted in colonialism, a structure that perpetuates inequalities and reinforces systemic oppression. As Nelson Maldonado Torres writes in his article, Outline of 10 Theses on Coloniality and Decoloniality, Western modernity and coloniality constitute each other. Europe became modern in the process of conquest and colonial expansion. In this video, we'll explore the intersection of decolonization and education, focusing on affirmative action, a policy that once bridged opportunity gaps, and its removal by the Supreme Court. We'll connect these changes to the broader fight for educational equality, asking, as Nicolette Parkhurst does in her Indigenous People Rise Up, in what ways have movements like #NoDAPL caused disruptions of existing colonial systems? We will connect this concept to the current campus climate at New York University after the removal of affirmative action and explore the concept of education having always been a colonial space. How is this decision being perceived, being so current, and how do other policies like Project 2025 that are being proposed continue to impact our education and progress? Throughout history, education has always been at a struggle to gain equitable access to everyone regardless of race, gender, and sex. For example, the Brown v. Board decision in 1954, the Supreme Court case declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional, overturning the precedent set by Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, which had upheld the separate but equal doctrine. Unanimously ruled that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. This decision was a major milestone in the civil rights movement as it laid the legal foundation for dismantling segregation in public institutions. Brown was not just about integration, but also about challenging the systemic denial of equitable resources and opportunities to Black students. It represented a step forward towards decolonizing education by affirming the rights of marginalized communities to access equal education. Similarly, in Menendez v. Westminster in 1947, this federal case challenged the segregation of Mexican American students in California schools. This decision became a precursor to Brown v. Board of Education as it was the first federal case to rule against segregation in schools. Menendez challenged the racialized exclusion of Mexican American students, asserting their right to equal education. It also paved the way for broader challenges to segregation across the United States, demonstrating how grassroots efforts can dismantle colonial structures in education. Lastly, while talking about equity in higher education and education as a whole, it is important to go over the histories of Asian Americans in this country as well. It is a harmful stereotype to think that Asian Americans are not impacted by the inequalities in colonial education system as well, as historically they were also excluded. This can be seen in the U.S. Supreme Court case Gong Lam v. Rice in 1927. This case involved a Chinese American student, Martha Lum, who was denied entry to a white public school in Mississippi because she was classified as non-white. We must not also forget that Native Americans were forced to attend boarding schools by the United States government designed to assimilate Native American children by erasing their cultural identities, languages, and traditions. Education in this sense has always been part of a colonial framework, as you can see throughout history. Many educational policies, like affirmative action, were created as one of the many steps taken to dismantle the colonial practices of education. In 2023, the Supreme Court effectively ended race-conscious admissions in the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard UNC, marking a significant rollback of affirmative action policies in education, showing that instead of continuing decolonizing practices, we are reverting back to colonial times in education. However, there's a common misconception that affirmative action was a policy that was strictly based off of just race, without keeping in mind that race is a factor that impacts their life, ultimately leading to the decision and what affirmative action is created for. For example, as a low-income first-generation Latina student, I went to a public 1001 high school in upstate New York. Just a mile from me, there was another high school that was public that had a lot more resources than my school did. In terms of college prep and other materials as such, the other school was a lot more equipped than my school was, and having those resources and having students that would go on to high prestigious four-year universities. I was a student who worked 2 jobs, had to help support my family, was responsible for myself financially while being in school and being involved in extracurricular activities, because I knew I needed to also do more to set myself apart from other students who had more opportunities and resources to get better grades. My race was not just the sole factor in my admissions, but because of my background, my race played a crucial role in the environment that I was in that had my opportunities set back compared to the schools around me. To gauge different perspectives on the situation and to gauge the current campus climate at New York University, I'm going to go around and interview students on campus to see where they stand in this situation or what their perceptions of this is.
Hi, I'm Stephen Robinson. I'm a sophomore in the School of Professional Studies.
My name is John R.C. I'm currently attending the College of Arts and Science, and I'm a junior.
Hi, my name is Brayton Alexander, and I am a junior student at Steinhardt, studying media culture and communication.
Hi, my name is Jason Williams. I'm in the Stern School of Business, and I'm a senior.
Hi, my name is Miriam Chaya. I'm currently a junior, class of 2026, at NYU's Gallatin School of Individualized Study.
My name is Sebastián Alfonso Prats Fernandez. I am a senior, class of 2025 in CAS.
Definitely, yeah. I think especially within Stern, I think it's kind of been seen that affirmative action doesn't really exist in a way. I mean, I don't think there's many students of color within Stern, especially. I think within my class, we had around, I think 8 or so black men within my class. So again, I've always seen it then, but then when you see how it kind of impacted Stern this year, now they only have 4. So I mean, it kind of fluctuates here and there, but I hope this doesn't really like affect how it looks long term. I think there's definitely been a lot more open sentiment against affirmative action. For example, now that it's over, people are like, oh yes, things can kind of go back to the way that they should be, based off more like academics and less about racial factors, for example. So I've seen more and more people talk about things like that, things that they would never really talk about before, but now that it's kind of going away, it's a little intimidating, honestly, to kind of speak against that, but it's just a difficult conversation needs to be had.
Just been like a lot more conversations about what the changing demographics at NYU could like potentially produce. I'm specifically in a lot of spaces on campus that are targeted around Black, Latina, and Indigenous students. And I know in my own experience, like I've had several talks with my advisors and with my other peers in these spaces just about how these changing demographics could potentially like affect our own programs and what a lower presence of minorities could mean for us and our experiences.
Do you think that the ending of affirmative action will only continue to try and add on to the the struggle of the colonial impact that has been on the education system since its creation, especially in the Western world?
It's like colonial times honestly established that the most important people, especially in America, were people who were white men. So I think that taking away affirmative action could potentially kind of perpetuate that same type of mindset. And it honestly kind of goes to show how minorities are essentially like not very protected by the law, especially in this case.
I think now it's really going to be a time where a lot of people of color are going to have to come together and mobilize, pretty similar to like the 1950s, for example. And, as they begin to really repeal a bunch of these rights that we had before, I think we really have to find a way to like prove that this actually means something and it's actually very relevant. So I think it's really going to be a new period of mobilization, actually. Probably will take a second for it to actually happen. And there will be a little bit of tension here and there, I feel like, but I do see a lot of similarity between now and then where there's not the same rights that a lot of people of color are really looking for. And they're really going to have to make their voices heard and known to people who are in higher powers.
I think that at the end of the day, it all comes back to opportunities. If we're not given the opportunity to thrive and flourish in like universities like ours, then how will we expect to be on the same intellectual level as people who were given that opportunity? So I feel like if things like affirmative action are taken away from us, it's kind of just another barrier we have to overcome, and that's not super fair to us.
Promoting these resources that are outside of school, that are gravitated still towards people of color or minorities, overall will help build the skill gap and hopefully get them into NYU even without affirmative action.
Universities can make it especially known that minorities like are protected groups at these campuses. I think that could produce different initiatives and programming and making sure that minorities feel like they have a safe space on campus, even if that is like a dedicated building program, something where like minorities feel like they can go and receive resources and also just feel accepted at their own campus.
I think the main way would likely have to be to really support the student that they do let into these institutions. Oftentimes, people of color, student of color organizations aren't really funded the way they really need to be. If you're going to let people of color into NYU, you should give them at least a space to feel that they're actually welcome here.
I do think that colleges now have, well, they should have been, but they now do have to work 10 times harder to make sure that Black students and minority students, students of color voices are heard, seeing that everywhere our voices are trying to be silenced. And now more than ever, we need programs and we need students even before they get to college. So high school students starting to think about, okay, what do I need to do to get to these schools that I want to get in, especially since now I have to, like I said before, work 10 times harder. These colleges and these universities need professors, they need student leaders, they need everybody like laser focused on how to give support to minority students and Black students.
I think the main place to do it in is the classroom, and that involves having professors from different backgrounds and the actual content of the classes. And obviously, that's going to be more case by case, but still making an active effort to shine a light on these things.
As a Black woman, sometimes in classes, like it feels like we are few and far between. So I'm especially interested to see how that looks for these next incoming classes in the few years to come.
I'm just like not anxious, but anxious to see what's gonna come.
We are living in a time where decolonization practices are being erased and are being brought to the colonial foundation that education first started on. Alongside the removal of affirmative action, other diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practices are starting to be erased. An example of this could be the book bans that are happening all across the United States. The conservative agenda is trying to get all of us to think a certain type of way that is conforming to white colonial standards, while when we engage in things like critical race theory that may be threatening or uncomfortable conversations for them, that is why they are trying to erase this and have us all stick to one general framework that is the colonial practices that education very started on. This general framework is the framework does not include our experiences and our perspectives as people of color, but just sticks to the same colonial white framework that they want us to stick to and all conform to.